Welcome to episode 1 of Scott's on the Rocks Politica podcast. I am your host, Scott M. Graves, and sharing the stage, the virtual stage with me is Scott J. Graves. How are you, Scott?
I'm fine.
And we're here to talk all things political, the Scott's on the Rocks Politica podcast. And I'm going to set the stage a little bit here right now. We're gonna look at the phenomenon of the unenrolled voter. Scott, I do not know if you knew. You probably do, but just in case our listeners don't, that I'm gonna shoot out a couple of statistics here to get the conversation started. Nationally, 36% of the voters in the United States were independent, or otherwise known as unenrolled, by 1976. And today, and since 76, 44 years ago, roughly a third of the electorate is considered unenrolled. Now, if we drill that down to a little bit more locally, the current statistics in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for our district, the 2nd Worcester district, for the House of Representatives, 62.3%, a full 62.3% of voters in our district are considered unenrolled. And the percentages for the city in which Scott and I are talking to you from tonight, Gardner, Massachusetts, very consistent with those. Where you live and how that locality administers primaries, who your neighbors are, i.e., sort of like the familial or peer pressure, and other regional factors usually determine how independents vote. The reality of unenrolled voters is the majority vote predictably partisan. They just prefer to remain, unenrolled. Roughly a third are truly independent over their lifetimes as a record of voting at the national level. And this gets more interesting as you get to more localized elections, because that behavior then starts to skew one way or another, depending on where you are in the country and your local district. So
where did you look, Scott? Where did you look to find your demographics in that regard?
That's a very good question. So the district demographics I received from both of the political parties in current campaign reports, 2 or 3 different campaign reports, just within the last this current House of Representatives campaign going on right now. And then the other national statistics I got from, let's see, and this will be up on the episode page. I got them from a combination of the Secretary of State's office for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and also some by Commonwealth Magazine, and also from a Department of Statistics, I believe, from the federal government.
Okay, because it's interesting in how an organization would come up with results of things like how a unenrolled person would vote. I mean, what do they ask them at exit polls or whatnot? I looked at, I have this source. He's a nationally recognized, I don't know if you call him a pollster, but his name's Lee Drutman, Drutman, and his company's called 538. And he had a really interesting article that I read, and he broke it down into basically 3 kinds of people who are kind of unpredictable. One considers themselves moderate. The other group is undecided, and the last group is independent. And so what he showed was he did an intersectionality of those 3 groups, and he showed that the people that consider themselves all 3 are 2.4% of the population, generally speaking. And of that 2.4%, they vary diversely in terms of ideologies. So his bottom line was that these people that consider themselves moderates or even independents or undecided voters, there's no way to predict how they're going to vote for the large part. They're all over the map. So his takeaway is that if you hear people saying, "Well, it looks like the undecideds are looking for a middle of the road type candidate or a middle of the road type issue," is not necessarily the case, and in fact is not the case. So that's a huge wild card if you want to talk about the election that's coming up or the elections coming up. That's a huge wild card because there's quite a few, as you just said, there's quite a few people that aren't enrolled in either of the two monopolistic parties, and there's really no way of knowing which way they're going to go.
No, and I would imagine, and this is all anecdotal, but in my personal experience, um, living here now for 15 years, the more, and I'm just extrapolating that this is probably the case in a lot of small, little out of the way places all over the country. The more localized you get in an election, the more unpredictable it gets. So, um, and the unenrolled, just the idea of interacting with them and what do I want to say and securing votes from them becomes that much more difficult. And just to give, not to go too far back, but just to give our listeners one last bit of perspective, the way those numbers work out here in Massachusetts, as of September 2020, okay, this means that in total there are 4.6 million voters who are registered to vote in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. 1.4, just a hair, I mean, just a hair under 1.5 million are registered Democrat. 459,900 are registered Republican. Independents, 2.6 million people. And then again, bringing that down locally, 62%, a little over 62% of registered voters in our district, 4 towns that comprise the second Worcester district, are unenrolled. And so in this race, which if it's like many other municipal and local state races is probably going to, if you had to say, probably in the last 5 or 6 state rep races, did they all boil down to about somewhere between 2 to 4 or 500 votes?
Um,
Wide swinging ones in the last 10 years or 15 years or so, or?
I'm not sure. Probably a little bit more than that, because I don't think that there were a few, maybe 1 or 2 close races, but for the large part, the races, even the one that I was in, well, that was a primary in 2012. Um, I think 2012 when it was between Bastine and Zlotnick, when Zlotnick first got in, I think that was a pretty close race. I can't remember. That might have been 1 or 200 votes. But yeah, you're probably right. If you average them all out over the last, say, 10 or 15 years.
In other words, I guess my point is that the races are extremely close, and the vast majority of, getting back to your point of the unpredictability, there's no. It seems as though there's no taking for granted any number of votes simply because we don't really know which way they're going to go based on party affiliation, certainly.
Right.
You know?
Um,
And there seems to be this issue. One of the issues I take with current campaign, and we're not seeing this in our district, but we're only here to talk about our district, is the non-campaign. Now, we've seen this at the municipal level, but now we're also seeing this at the state level, where in the particular case of the current campaign, we have a Republican candidate who is, he happens to be Republican. He's heavily campaigning in a variety of different ways, as much as you can in the zombie apocalypse, otherwise known as the COVID-19
yeah.
pandemic.
Which race are you talking about? State rep?
This is yeah. I'm sorry. I'm focusing right now at the moment on the state rep campaign.
Yeah.
So we have a gentleman by the name of Bruce Chester is running as a Republican, campaigning as much as he possibly can with the resources he has and with the restrictions due to COVID-19, running against the incumbent Democrat John Zlotnick, who essentially it's almost like the non-campaign. There's not a lot coming out from the campaign for information. He's put out a series, at least through social media, he's put out a series of endorsements, which look, that, range from municipal elected officials and throughout the district and some other professionals and whatnot. did not agree to debates, a series of debates. I'm just wondering what your sort of take is on having yourself run for office a number of times. What do you think about the idea of the non-campaign as a campaign tactic?